Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on which part of the world you're in. Today we have over 2,200 registrations from over 100 countries. And on behalf of the organisers, I wanted to warmly thank you all for joining us for this very important discussion. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Helen Brand, the Chief Executive of ACCA, the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, a global professional accountancy body representing a worldwide community of 233,000 members and 536,000 future members across 178 countries. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's discussion on fostering taxpayer education to enhance public trust in tax and help achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs as they've become known. This global event has been jointly organised by ACCA and IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants, in collaboration with the OECD. So before we get started properly, let me share some brief housekeeping guidance with you. You can start asking questions as soon as you like using the Slido link which you see on this screen. You can scan the QR code with your phone or click on the link of the YouTube page. Please also note that the webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand afterwards. So let's now focus on what's bringing us together today, contributing to the SDGs and enhancing public trust in tax through taxpayer education. The COVID-19 pandemic has further highlighted that well-functioning tax systems and high levels of taxpayer trust and confidence are vital, especially in challenging times when tough decisions are necessary. The relationship between taxpayers and governments and between businesses, society and tax systems will be fundamental to shaping the economies that will support us all over the coming years. Public trust is instrumental to the effectiveness and sustainability of any tax system and is a key component in tax morale, which is the tendency for individuals and businesses to pay their tax voluntarily without intervention by tax authorities. And to build public trust in tax systems, it's vital to provide citizens with the information necessary to understand how tax systems work, the rights and obligations of taxpayers, and importantly, how citizens can influence the evolution of the tax system. I'm also convinced that the willingness of individuals and businesses to voluntarily pay their tax and their trust in the system can be improved through a better understanding of how tax systems can work for the benefit of all, supporting a fair and just transition and contributing to achieving the SDGs. Taxpayers want to see tax systems used to target specific positive outcomes. In addition, in order for us to make responsible tax decisions, we must be able to understand and correctly predict the tax implications of our choices. To make responsible tax decisions, people need to have knowledge, skills and confidence in the system. There are a number of ways in which the public can gain these. The first thing that comes to mind, of course, is teaching tax, educating taxpayers about the system, how it works and why it matters. Increasing the understanding of tax can also be done through providing taxpayers with justifications for specific changes in tax law, or through communications encouraging taxpayers to see their taxes as their fair contribution to society. Taxpayers' education is an important part of financial literacy, something that's part of ACCA's purpose to strive to be a force for public good. Financial literacy leads to financial capability, which then leads to financial inclusion and ultimately financial success. In this vein, we commend the European Commission and the OECD International Network on Financial Education for their new joint financial competence framework for adults. This education could start younger, and in many countries that's the case. In 2021, together with IFAC and Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, we published our 2021 edition of the Public Trust in Tax Survey, which we launched in Brussels in collaboration with OECD last September. many survey respondents stressed the importance of financial education from an early age so that people understand the purpose of tax. People understanding where their money is going and the benefits it pays for was highlighted in several of the roundtables we organised across the world for the survey. One of our respondents in South Africa said, "It is crucial to encourage government to introduce financial education from primary school. In that way, it will help the generation to come to understand savings and the purpose of tax." But educating taxpayers is not just the business of tax administrations. To succeed, collaboration and partnerships with other stakeholders such as schools, professional bodies, business associations and non-governmental organisations are essential, especially at a time when already stretched tax authority resources are strained still further by the impacts of the COVID pandemic. At ACCA, we're determined to play our part through the education, lifelong learning material and the series of technical and policy reports we deliver, and through engaging with key stakeholders, including the younger generation, to support financial education and drive trust in tax and trust in the profession in the public interest. And that is precisely why we partner today again with IFAC and the OECD to discuss the main findings of the recent report from the OECD, Building a Tax Culture, Compliance and Citizenship, a global sourcebook on taxpayer education, second edition, that will be presented in a minute by Grace Perez Navarro, Deputy Director of the OECD's Tax Centre. The main findings of the report and the three main approaches around taxpayers' education identified in this report, namely teaching tax, communicating tax and supporting taxpayers directly in compliance, will then be discussed by our panel, moderated by Scott Hanson, Director of Public Policy and Regulation at IFAC. Our renowned experts will also examine how to foster effective collaboration amongst the key actors. After Grace, we have the honour of welcoming Victor Negrescu, MEP, who is a long-standing promoter of financial and tax education. He was at the beginnings of the creation of Tax Edu, which will be presented to you by Agnia Raza from the European Commission. But for now, let's hear the insights from the OECD report. Grace, over to you.
Thanks very much, Helen, and it's great to know we have such a huge and very global audience for this. I think that bodes well for our whole objective of trying to promote taxpayer education. We've been looking at the whole issue of taxpayer education as part of our work at OECD on tax morale, which, as you mentioned, is trying to understand what really motivates taxpayers to pay tax responsibly. And the research that we did in preparing our 2019 report highlighted the importance of taxpayer education in the whole tax morale area. For example, by far the most important factor affecting the willingness to pay tax in Africa was the perception of the legitimacy of the tax administration, while difficulty in understanding the tax system was the third most important factor. Taxpayer education can address both of these issues. Now, in our new report, which is the second edition of Building Tax Culture, Compliance and Citizenship, we aim to provide a resource for anyone looking to design and implement and improve any taxpayer education programs. Now, in preparing this report, we used a global survey and as a result gathered information on 140 such initiatives undertaken in 59 countries, covering all continents and all levels of development. This has produced new and unique data from which to deepen our knowledge and improve taxpayer education programs. We've analyzed these initiatives to produce a typology of approaches to taxpayer education, as well as to identify common challenges and solutions. The report includes a simple checklist of questions as a guide in designing a taxpayer education program. Now, the survey provided us with a huge variety of approaches to taxpayer education, and the report has details all in a very big annex, which we won't have time to go through today. But some of these approaches include student essay writing contests, that's not so surprising, TV shows with a tax plot line. I haven't seen those on Netflix yet, but hopefully we'll see more of those soon. Tax fairs, computer games with a tax theme, those I have seen. Mobile tax units, business and tax administration forums, such as the ones we have organized. And then tax wraps and animations, again, something I haven't seen, but is obviously out there. And then finally, outreach programs to vulnerable populations to help them with both taxes and the benefits that can be provided. Now, overall, as you said, Helen, we found three main approaches to taxpayer education. First, teaching tax, which is the most obvious approach, using the traditional teaching methods. The objective here is to usually just engage in a more complex discussion, either on the role of the tax system or the technicalities of specific parts of the tax system. Now, this requires a more extended engagement with taxpayers than other approaches, and also requires engagement with future taxpayers, as there are lots of programs with children and students. Now, it should be noted that this approach can be very resource intensive. So that is one of the downsides, or at least requires a major commitment. Now, the second main approach is communicating about tax to raise awareness. This works basically at a higher level, more like advertising. This type of approach is focused on shorter engagement that plants the seed to engage on tax issues or to nudge behavior in the right direction. Many of the initiatives of this type look to help strengthen the relationship between taxpayers and the tax administration, trying to make the tax administration less scary and more approachable. Now, the third approach is, as Helen mentioned, is providing practical assistance, what we call learning by doing. And as we've learned through the OECD initiative of Tax Inspectors Without Borders, learning by doing is a very valuable and effective tool. Approaches in this category work with taxpayers and guide them through the practicalities of paying taxes, especially when there are new digital tools to be used, or working with vulnerable groups who may otherwise struggle to engage with the tax system. The report goes into much more detail on each of these three approaches and subdivides them further, but we don't have time to go through all of them now. Now, while there are differences between the three approaches, there are a few common threads that I'd like to point out. First, identifying and reaching the target audience is often the biggest challenge. Initiatives are usually trying to reach those whom the tax administration doesn't speak to already. So that means they can't easily rely on the existing tools to reach the target audience. They need to come up with new ones. Second, partners beyond the tax administration are really important. Finding partners who are in contact with and trusted by the target audience can be vital to the success of such programs. The type of partner will depend on the target audience. They can be from elsewhere in government or beyond. Some examples that we've seen include the Ministry of Education or teachers for teaching students, NGOs that are working with vulnerable populations, musicians, celebrities for reaching a mass audience, and business associations can play quite a critical role. So the right partner can help a program grow and become sustainable. But we need to be sure that we have the right partner for the audience. For example, when we're trying to reach students, we need to try to reach them using the education ministry. That is vital to the success of such an approach. Now, third, taxpayer education is a long-term project. I think we all know this. Changing taxpayer culture won't happen overnight, so there's a need to be realistic about what can be achieved and by when. We looked at initiatives from the 28 countries that had featured in our first edition of this report in 2015, and all but one were still running, and that one has been revamped or superseded by a new initiative. Securing resources for taxpayer education programs and to keep them going is a universal challenge for everyone, and it can prevent the programs from maintaining the momentum that they develop and from growing further. Fourth, timing of delivery can be vital. When programs are linked to specific deadlines in the tax calendar, it's vital to deliver on time. And it's also important to consider the impact of the timing on the specific audience that we're targeting. So for example, if we're trying to engage students in a discussion on taxation, we shouldn't do it when they're in the middle of their exams, or they just won't be paying attention. And fifth, and this is kind of surprising, there's limited monitoring and evaluation of taxpayer education programs. Only half of the initiatives that we covered in the report had any form of review, and less than 20% had any external evaluation. Nevertheless, there's a strong perception that the programs are successful, and over 75% of our respondents saw their programs as having a large or very large impact on people's sense of moral obligation to pay tax. Now, the report is not only about analyzing the data from the experience of the 59 countries surveyed. We've tried to convert the findings to help those interested in developing new initiatives or enhancing the existing ones by developing some specific guidance. And so we've come up with a 4-phase process for designing efficient and effective taxpayer education initiatives. 1, defining the objective. 2, checking the resources available. 3, identifying the type of initiative required and when. And then tailoring the design to fit the local context. Each of these phases is accompanied by some key questions to help stimulate thinking in the design of the program. We hope that this report can help encourage a greater commitment to taxpayer education. As we all know, the tax systems rely on voluntary compliance, and that is ultimately a learned behavior. So we hope with this, we can stimulate the discussion that will follow. Thanks very much, and we look forward to the questions that are coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. That was a really fantastic overview, and I'm sure, as you said, it will stimulate a lot of thought and add to actually what I believe are already lots of questions pouring in. So a topic of great interest, and thank you for that fantastic oversight of your report. So we now have the pleasure of welcoming Victor Negrescu, an active member in the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, and a permanent member of the Committee on Budgets and the delegation to the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly. He's also a substitute member in the Committee on Legal Affairs, Committee on Constitutional Affairs, and Delegation for Relations with Canada. Thank you for joining us, Victor, and the floor is yours.
Hello to everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I would like to congratulate, first of all, the organizers for organizing this debate on such an important topic, which is tax education. Of course, in my quality as a member of the European Parliament, I have been honored to initiate a couple of key projects in the field of tax education. Among those initiatives, of course, is the initiation of TaxEdu, which was initially a pilot project that we proposed from the European Parliament, designed to educate, teach, involve young people in the process of learning about taxes. And we did that, I think, in a clever way with the support of the European Commission, because we tried to merge the information existing about taxes in a certain way that is attractive for young people. So, of course, they develop games, they develop e-learning materials, they develop micro-learning clips. They also design a special teacher's corner offering adequate resources, tips and tricks on how to teach about taxes. So all of that has been developed at European level. Several member states have accelerated the process, and they even managed, of course, to introduce within their own national curriculum specific programs designed to enhance tax education. And of course, the success of these pilot projects shows that there is an interest from young people, from educators, from schools, from member states, from countries all over the world in improving the level of education about taxes. Because when we speak about tax education, we speak mainly, like it was said before, about the impact such type of learning, such type of education has on the short and long term. The short-term impact is for people to be acquainted, to learn, to understand the issue of taxes, why we should pay taxes and how our taxes are being used, how to collaborate with tax institutions, how to collaborate with experts in the field to understand all of that, understand the mechanism of resources, money, taxes, budgets, and so forth. So this is a key element, and this is a starting point. It creates in the mentality of people a sort of an ownership over their taxes, and why, of course, the process is important. The long-term impact, hopefully the long-term impact, is to convince citizens, convince people that paying taxes is something that, of course, is normal, but it's also something that is useful for them to understand, again, how they can have an organized way of engaging with the tax administration, how to deal, again, with the challenges in the field, how to approach this element in a very conscious way, in an elaborated way, in a way that enables them, of course, not to make errors, avoid mistakes, avoid, of course, situations that are contrary to the law, and in the same time, of course, become, let's say, that citizen that participates, again, to the development of their society. Because, again, here I think the long-term impact is about sustainable development goals. It's about generating a perspective with the money that we are contributing, that we are allocating, of course, in terms of taxes, to our states, to our countries, to our local communities, and how the resources are going in that direction. And of course, the short-term impact, the long-term impact, ownership, accountability, responsibility, these three key elements that emerge from those different directions are key, in my opinion, of course, when it comes to the purpose of tax education. So if we speak about again, statistics, because it's important to look at that. We see that, unfortunately, people are not fully aware of the importance of taxes, and they are not financially literate or tax literate, we might say. So according to statistics, at world level, only 1/3 of adults understand basic financial concepts, which is not enough. In the same time, if we speak about young people, only 24% of millennials understand basic financial topics, which implies a huge gap. So young people today are not fully aware of the purpose of taxes, of the purpose of financial education, of how they can, of course, use that in a proper way in their daily lives. And of course, this is contrary to what is happening actually today in the world. Now we speak about democratization of investment. People, young people, but not only young people, sit behind their computers and they can invest in stocks, in cryptocurrencies. They do that. They are targeted with specific ads, but they don't understand that, for instance, when you invest in cryptocurrency, when you buy an NFT, you have to pay taxes for that. In the same time, they don't know if they earn money from their investment. They need, of course, probably to have the support of a tax expert helping them deal with all of that. Sometimes they have a YouTube channel, they earn revenue, and they don't know how to deal with that element. So, of course, they see nice videos of people winning a lot of money and people doing a lot of great things, which is terrific. This democratization is perfect, but they don't understand what's behind that. But from time to time, we see in the medias people that succeeded, especially young people, by doing and taking advantage of all these new opportunities. And after a couple of years, we hear about them losing all their money because sometimes they forgot to pay their taxes, or they were not aware again of the responsibility that they had. That the fact in each country there are specific regulations, but also when you act at the global level, you have to understand again the global dimension of taxation, the global dimension of financial means and regulations. And of course, this leads to something that is clear also in statistics. Around roughly 60% of millennials feel anxious when thinking about their financial situation. And in the same time, sometimes they go and they ask for help from their friends, from their family, from their parents. Usually the parents are helping, but this is not enough. You need a proper tool to help people get information about taxes. And of course, we need to intervene and act at an early age. And tax education here in this regard is a key element. And of course, I looked at the OECD report, and I think there are some key recommendations that have to be taken on board in this regard. So we have to do something that is also visible there in the slogans. We have to think ahead, and we have to design better policies. So if we have those two ideas on board, what we should do is presented in the OECD report. It has been presented by the Commission, is highly defended by the European Parliament. It's about acting at the global level. So we need, of course, to have a development strategy for tax education that involves educational professionals, the educational system, but also experts in financial elements and in taxes. We need, of course, to coordinate at national level, but also coordinate at European, regional, or global level in this regard, and sometimes give some visibility to the concept itself, either through bodies that coordinate the process, or simply having prominent figures speaking about that. We need a learning framework. This doesn't mean that we are uniformizing everything, but it's a learning framework with clear goals, with outcomes, with content, with pedagogical approaches, with resources, even with evaluation plans. So this is key in the same time. And of course, in order to do that, we need to invest a lot in educators. So teach them, train them, prepare them in how to present this type of information. So at the end, we are effective. We provide high quality learning tools. We are reaching the objectives, and we provide accessible formats of education. So we need to invest in all of that. So all of that cannot be done by simply speaking about it. We have people that are enthusiastic, like myself, like yourselves, about tax education, but we need the design. So we need to identify those resources, sustainable sources of funding, to make that feasible. And of course, think about the outcome and what we can achieve at the end. Because what we are investing now actually in tax education, it might seem a lot for some countries or for some local communities, but what we invest now certainly will bring an added value in terms of income, in terms of tax revenues after a couple of years. If the process works well, if the design is proper and efficient, the return will become faster, because young people, for instance, might convince their parents to deal better with that issue. But in the same time, it's about adapting the format. So of course, this has been said before, the targeting is essential. So we have to target the groups that need this type of tax education. I spoke a lot about young people. That is not only them. We speak about vulnerable groups. We speak about elderly people. We speak about people living in isolated communities far away from the tax administrations. We speak about people that maybe are not used to this issue, or maybe have different values or different views. So we have to reach them in different ways, in an adapted way. Even, and this was mentioned before, even a movie or a Netflix show can be attractive for some of them. But in other cases, you cannot do that because people maybe do not have the time to do that. So you need to identify better ways. Schools, libraries, local authorities, the city halls, local NGOs, local organizations, trade union organizations, employers associations, all stakeholders that are close to those people that are in need of tax education should be part of the process. So my call today in my intervention is to continue what you are doing, but also create, why not, under the umbrella of the OECD, under the umbrella of the partners organizing the event today. And I want to congratulate them again for doing so, with the support of the Commission, with the support of the Parliament, with the support of relevant authorities from all countries that are present here. Organize a stakeholders group where we can maybe enhance, elaborate more on this issue, exchange more on this issue, but also take a leading role, a leadership role in promoting tax education. Because what we are doing now, it's about thinking ahead, and all the investment that we are, all the money that we are allocating for tax education is actually an investment in better policies for better lives and a sustainable future for everyone. So again, thank you so much for the invitation, and count on my full support from the European Parliament. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister Negrescu. Great to hear your encouraging words about the way forward and the tax education strategy coming from the European Union. This event and the OECD report are very much about sharing our ideas and experiences and learning from one another. So all very welcome there. Greetings, everyone. My name is Scott Hansen from IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants. And before we get to the panel, I'd also like to thank Grace from the OECD. The OECD is really a leader in advancing tax-related issues, and the work on tax education and morale is no different, and also encouraging to hear her perspectives on partnership. It's safe to say that organizations like IFAC and the ACCA hope to be effective and valuable partners in this space. My only advice would be for the OECD to come out with a playlist of all the tax-related rap songs featured in the report. I think that would be a hit. So now turning to the panel, I'd like to remind the panelists that they have 6 minutes for their preliminary remarks. So now, having heard from the OECD and the views from European Parliament, we'll continue with the EU perspective, but from another institution, starting with Agnia Rasa, Deputy Head of the Unit in Charge of Management of Programs and EU Training at DG Tax UD, who will share with us what the European Commission is doing. So with that, Agnia, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Scott. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted actually to bring a further insight into the European Union level activities and to present the initiatives that the European Commission is carrying out in this field. But first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation to contribute to this important discussion. Well, in the opening speech, Ms. Helen Brandt already referred to the very recent initiative by the Commission and OECD to step up financial literacy with the publication of the Financial Competence Framework for Adults in Europe. In my remarks, I would like to address two initiatives. One was already mentioned. This is the Tax Education Portal. The other one is related to tax compliance, supporting tax compliance through our e-learnings portal. However, before going into details, I would like to mention a few remarks regarding the context. Of course, our approach reflects the competences in this field. At EU level, we are setting some general principles, notably for indirect taxation, some minimum tax levels in this field. However, the main competence for setting up the tax framework and for collecting taxes belongs to the member states. When it comes to taxpayer education, of course, we work very closely with national authorities to develop new initiatives and new instruments, but afterwards then is the question about the deployment and use at national level. So now to explain how it works, I would like to introduce you to the Customs and Tax EU Learning Portal, as you can see on the background slide. Through this portal, we offer electronic learning courses. Initially, they were designated to tax and customs officials. So the primary objective was to strengthen national administrations in this field and to better equip them for a harmonized implementation of tax policy across Europe. However, the impact of this training material is much wider. The portal is publicly available. So it doesn't benefit only national administrations, but it is equally relevant to economic operators, to experts, to accountants and the general public. So as you can see in this slide, we have in our portfolio 20 modules which are related to taxation. Each of them is composed of several chapters with an average duration of 3 hours. For instance, an important focus is given to the Value-Added Tax Directive. In this training, we explain the core elements of the VAT legislation, since these elements have to be transposed into national legislation. So all these courses are free of charge. Most of them are publicly available. Some are limited to national administrations only. And also I would like to underline that, of course, they are kept regularly updated in line with the policy developments in Europe. Another important element to underline is the fact that these courses are translated into different languages of the member states and of other countries who participate in the program. So this means obviously that this facilitates access to a much wider audience. In this context, we work very closely with national authorities in the member states to make sure that the translated courses fit the national context and that also the terminology is adapted to the local context. So the courses can be completed on the portal, but they can also be used in the national learning portals of the member states and other countries. So if you look at the results, by now we have over 250,000 of officials from customs and tax administrations who have completed, who have benefited from this, from the training, from this tool. But as I mentioned, the impact is much wider. According to our monitoring, we consider that more than 3 million customs and tax professionals, and here we include economic operators, we include experts and other participants, have benefited from these courses. So, and then as a second, I would like to come back to the tax education portal. It was already introduced by Mr. Negrescu, member of the European Parliament, who was at the initiative of this project in 2017. So we could speak about a really European project. We can go to the next slide, please. So TaxEdu portal is really a European project since it was developed by the Commission following a proposal from the European Parliament, and it was developed in close cooperation with the member states. So, as it was mentioned, the objective is to educate the younger generation of European taxpayers, and it offers an alternative way to foster tax morale by explaining to younger generations the meaning of taxes and how they affect their daily life. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So you can see that the portal targets 3 age groups. We have special materials for younger users, kids, for teenagers, and then for young adults or first-time taxpayers. The type of material, as it was mentioned, so we have micro video clips, we have e-learning courses, and well, which are more advanced, obviously, for the third group of users. There are also games which are available on this portal. So we have our own game, which is called Taxlandia. We have also a link to another game which is developed outside the portal, which is the Mobility Era, which can be reached through our portal. Indeed, the portal is of direct relevance to educational authorities. For this, we have the Teachers' Corner, which provides teachers with lesson plans linked to each micro-learning presented on the portal. And there are materials which are available in 22 languages of the European Union. Of course, since the launch of this project, our ambition has been to support and to inspire member states and other participating countries to incorporate tax education into their school curriculum. In order to use the full potential of this portal, we are working in close cooperation with the national authorities. For this, we have a network of TaxEdu national promoters. We are meeting on a regular basis. This network involves all participating countries. And the objective is to exchange information in both ways. On one side, we provide materials, we provide messages that can be used also to promote the portal in social media. On the other, participants inform each other about the latest developments in their countries, which enables sharing best practices across Europe. So we see the TaxEdu portal as an enabler to foster tax morale and to boost voluntary compliance culture in the longer term. It also allows creating synergies. So today the instrument is at the disposal of member states and other participating countries as a source of inspiration and concrete support, and it is ready to be used also at national level. With this, I think I would like to conclude my introductory remarks, and I remain open for further comments.
Great, thank you, Agnia. One question to follow up with now, from your intervention, including when you spoke about the EU tax education, edu portal, I take you've been working very closely with the national tax authorities of the various EU member states and rely on a continuous exchange of information. Can you provide any specific examples of tax education initiatives in the various member states?
Yes, thank you. Indeed, one of the objectives of this portal is to bring taxpayer education into wider school curricula or wider financial literacy programs. And indeed, we see that there is a good progress that we can report, and in some countries it is already well in place. Maybe I can mention a few examples. In Greece, since 2018, taxpayer education is part of school curricula, and it is largely built on the materials available on this portal. Similar situation is also in Romania, where there has been an agreement between the Ministries of Finance and Education and financial authorities, and taxpayer education was introduced into financial education program. And also similar results were achieved in Bulgaria, where also quite a high number of students have been learning about tax education, and later on this subject was incorporated into financial education curriculum. So maybe to summarize, we see that very often this initiative is implemented, first of all, by tax administration representatives who are directly lecturing or providing materials at schools, producing different types of educational materials. In other cases, or later on, this subject is integrated into school curricula or wider national framework for financial literacy. On our portal, we are collecting this information. This is also an added value of this portal. Since by sharing these best practices, the organizers, of course, can receive European dimension and visibility to national initiatives. So I would say that there is definitely a range of interesting examples and best practices, and as also it was mentioned in the study, there is no one-size-fits-all option in this field. Many options are possible, but the common element is definitely that the taxpayer education requires cooperation between different actors. We speak about educational authorities, we speak about tax administration and financial authorities and broader financial sector. But it also requires cooperation at different levels. You have national and local level, and of course, then you have the European level, which can support initiatives, and then we can also speak about initiatives in a wider context, like the discussion today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Agnia, and really helpful to hear those specific examples. Again, in the spirit of this OECD report, learning from what we've all been doing to deliver impact is really what this is all about. So thank you there. Now we're going to turn to our next panelist, Julia Mascagni, who is the Research Director of the International Center for Tax and Development, the ICTD, and a Research Fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, the IDS. Julia, would you please discuss your perspectives on tax education?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Scott, and thanks for the opportunity to take part in this really interesting discussion about this new and excellent OECD report about taxpayer education. So I'm an economist, and my job is primarily to do tax research. So I thought I would focus my remarks on one of the report's findings, which is that there is surprisingly little evaluation of impact of those taxpayer education initiatives that we're discussing today. And in fact, other speakers before me have said that only a minority of the initiatives included in the report are externally reviewed, in fact, less than 1 in 5, and only half are reviewed at all. And even when those reviews exist, they are often more geared towards gathering participants' feedback than to rigorously evaluating impact. So of course it is useful to have any kind of evaluation, and what exists in terms of evaluation and reviews is extremely valuable. But there are many questions that remain unanswered. And for example, some of those studies show that those taxpayer education initiatives affect perceptions. That's important, and particularly perceptions around tax morale. But do they also affect behavior? Because ultimately policymakers are interested on whether taxpayers comply more as a result of those initiatives. And if they do affect behavior, then how and what specific aspects of compliance behavior? Because in principle, more informed taxpayers could actually pay more tax, but also less tax, exactly because now they know their way around the tax system. But also equally, we tend to think about tax compliance as this binary, comply or evade kind of decision. But in reality, it's a lot more complex than that. So I can think of about at least 5 steps in a taxpayer's compliance journey. So you need to register your firm with the revenue authority. You then need to submit a declaration. You then need to include in that declaration some meaningful information. And there's actually a pretty large portion of tax declarations, especially in low-income countries, that just include zero everywhere. So 0 sales, 0 expenses, 0 tax. And then even once you have included some meaningful information, it needs to be an accurate reflection of your true income. And then finally, even when you have a truthful declaration, you need to pay the taxes on the income that you declared. So it's incredibly more complex than just comply or evade, and we need to figure out exactly what taxpayer education affects and for which taxpayers. And these are just some of the examples of the open questions out there, but there are also others that are reported in the report. One of the most important ones is, if we find any impact, do they last over the longer term, or is it really only immediate? That's again important for policymakers, because they need to know, do we need to keep repeating those initiatives every year for the same taxpayers, or can we expect to put taxpayers on a good path of compliance, if we want to put it that way, and then for them to continue once they have received the knowledge that the program is expected to provide? So research can help answering some of those questions, and importantly, to also support decision makers at the country level to design and implement programs based on evidence. And of course, the OECD report shows a perception that those programs are successful, but also provides a really useful taxonomy and checklist of questions that can be used as a guide by policymakers. But at the country level, there will be questions on how these things translate in the specific context, how to implement those programs, what to expect from them, what works. And those questions are particularly relevant in resource-constrained contexts, like in low-income countries, where there aren't that many resources in terms of human and financial resources to dedicate to those programs. And tax administrators can't really afford to spend their scarce resources on things that are either not effective or not as effective as they could be. So to illustrate practically how research can help here, I want to give you a couple of examples of evaluations I was involved with in collaboration with colleagues from the ICTD and the Rwanda Revenue Authority. So the first example is an evaluation we did of a taxpayer education program run by the Rwanda Revenue Authority. It's a half day where new taxpayers get to learn about general information about the tax system. And because we were collaborating since the beginning with the Rwanda Revenue Authority, we set up the study so that we could capture knowledge. So we organized a tax quiz that we asked taxpayers with 20 questions about the tax system. And then we can capture also perceptions and behavior. And first of all, I was really surprised to actually learn that taxpayer knowledge is very weak. I knew it was weak, but the data is quite shocking. Almost 40% of the new taxpayers we interviewed don't know what tax type they're registered for. And this is weeks or months after registering. And the majority does not know what is the deadline or the tax rate for major tax types like the VAT. So this already shows the importance and urgency of investing in taxpayer education. But then importantly, weak knowledge is related to actual compliance. So the majority of new taxpayers face to submit a tax return in the first year after they're registered. So they are registered with the tax authority, but they don't engage in a meaningful relationship with the tax authority in the form of a tax declaration. So how did the program help? Well, knowledge increased by 40% as a result of attendance to the program. Perceptions about tax complexity decreased, and that is good because it's taxpayers that are less confused are also less likely to feel that the tax system is unfair, which is again one of the themes coming out in today's event, but also in the report. But importantly, there is an effect in taxpayer behavior. So the probability that they will make a tax declaration increases by at least 25% and up to 50%. And again, this is important because if taxpayers don't submit a declaration in the first year, what our data shows is that they're very unlikely to ever submit a declaration in their life later. So making sure that they start on a good footing in the first year after having registered is key. Importantly, this effect in taxpayer behavior persists after 1 year. So it's not just immediate after attending the education program. It lasts for at least another year after that. So here, there wasn't that much revenue gain from this program, but certainly the program encouraged a meaningful engagement in the tax-paying process, and which certainly helps to lay the foundations for a compliance culture and maybe even revenue gains down the line as those firms that have just registered keep growing over time. The second example is about a communication campaign. And here is one of the communication campaigns that many revenue authorities engage with, which involved sending messages to taxpayers. And again, because we as researchers were involved since the beginning of the design of this intervention, we decided together with the Rwanda Revenue Authority to vary both the contents and the delivery methods. So we could really see what is it that is most effective here. So we had some messages about deterrence, some messages about the relationship between tax and public services, and then we used SMS, emails, and physical letters. And then we checked the impact. We could do that rigorously because this was set up as a randomized control trial. And we found some results that might be quite expected. So we had large revenue gains, about 6 million in extra revenue compared to a cost of the campaign of well below $4,000. But also we found some unexpected results. So two in particular I want to mention. One is that the SMS were really effective, even when compared to physical letters. And that is very relevant to a revenue authority from a low-income country where sending letters can be incredibly complex and costly. So here we have a much easier way to communicate with taxpayers, a much cheaper way, which yields the same effect in terms of extra revenue. But then we also found that those messages were working for small taxpayers, but were backfiring for larger taxpayers. So those larger taxpayers don't actually need to be reminded of deadlines. And in their case, not only there wasn't an effect on compliance, but actually there might have even been a backfiring effect. And contrary to the Taxpayer Education program, there was no long-term effect at all of those interventions. So these are just a couple of examples of the kind of detail that high-quality research can offer to policymakers in trying to disentangle the impact of those taxpayer education programs.
Great, thank you, Julia. That's incredibly interesting. It's obvious that, I mean, impact is something that any international organization or any policymaker needs to be thinking about, sort of continuously. And very interesting on your point about technology and how that really increases efficiency there. Just a follow-up question for you now. In practice, so what should policymakers be making of this evidence that you described? So what next with that evidence?
Well, I guess one first takeaway is that the evidence that we have, even the more rigorous evidence that we have, and I'm not only talking about my own work, but the whole literature out there, really provides some support for the effectiveness of friendly approaches to tax compliance. And that's important because for many tax administrators, enforcement remains the cornerstone of their job. And I think what this evidence shows is that friendly approaches can be a useful complement to enforcement. Of course, the two things are not alternatives. But then it can also provide some detailed results to guide practical policy decisions. So, for example, from the evidence that I just mentioned, from taxpayer training of new taxpayer, policymakers should probably not expect large revenue gains, but they can certainly expect that to help building a culture of compliance. And similarly, it might not be very useful or even counterproductive to send lots of reminders and lots of messages to large taxpayers. I mean, these people know what are their tax obligations. They can pay excellent accountants and consultants to help them with their tax obligations. So that is not only helpful, but possibly carries quite some risks. So perhaps there are other initiatives like recognizing their role as good taxpayers that can be more helpful there. In practice, I think there is probably a mix of different initiatives that are needed throughout the life of a taxpayer. As taxpayers grow, they need different things, but also different types of taxpayers need different types of interventions. And I think rigorous analysis can help target initiatives and make sure they are as effective as they can be. And in that sense, I really welcome the OECD's report taxonomy and wide sort of understanding of what taxpayer education is, including all the different aspects. The last point I'll make is about collaboration and partnership with key actors, which of course is one of the key themes coming out of the report. And one of those actors, again, is researchers. These collaborations can be extremely fruitful. Researchers will be interested in partnering up with revenue authorities, and revenue authorities can gain a great deal by getting high quality evidence, often for free, because researchers will do this for their interest in those topics and for advancing knowledge, which is what they do. So I would certainly encourage any tax administrators who are listening to reach out to researchers and organizations who are engaged in this to work together. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you again, Julia. Very interesting to hear your perspective there. So now turning to the perspective of a tax authority from Africa, Mr. Richard Kayombo, the Director of Taxpayer Services and Education at the Tanzania Revenue Authority. Richard, I think we're all interested in hearing from your direct practitioner's perspective. So over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm happy to join you in this forum, and thank the organizers as well. Indeed, if I could say, one of the foot soldiers, I can say those are real on the ground doing the actual tax education activities. In the Tanzania Revenue Authority, where I work as the Director of Taxpayer Education, we have a couple of initiatives that we carry out to be able to educate taxpayers. And if I do categorize them in terms of what are the categories that OECD has developed, like teaching taxpayers, teaching taxation, communicating taxation, and supporting taxpayers. I would first of all say, for instance, with the teaching taxpayers, we do a couple of things in that area. I understand it's the traditional way of engaging the taxpayers. That is to do with we have like seminars, we have workshops, we have face-to-face engagements of various types, like tax advisory committees that are available in all districts across the country. And those are the traditional methods that have been there for so long. But when it comes to communicating taxation, which is a very key role, we do engage taxpayers in other means. For instance, we do the advertising of various new initiatives or information that we need them to know or understand about the various taxes, various procedures of paying taxes. If there are any issues they need to know to be able to comply, dates for compliance of various types of taxes, for instance, when they have to submit their returns, the way they have to make their payments, and so on and so forth. But we also understand that we have a very large number of taxpayers with a lot of diversity. Like the previous speaker just mentioned, the large taxpayers who don't have really issues in terms of knowing what to do because they are professionals, they engage tax consultants that are professional, but the issue is with the small and medium taxpayers who struggle, first of all, to know what they're supposed to pay, how to pay it, when to pay it. Even if you say to them some at the beginning, sometimes they do forget. So we need to engage them from time to time through various methods like advertising or developing messages that we send to them through bulk SMS, for instance, to remind them about when to pay certain taxes, when to submit their returns, and also sometimes just to encourage them to do the right things all the time. We do go further because in my country, just like in many countries in Africa, we have a big chunk of businesses who are involved in the informal sector, where they do businesses. They could be in a place where you have so many businesses, but most of these businesses are either sole proprietors or they are businesses that are run by families. And as such, there are times when it's difficult for them to leave their business premises to go out and attend certain issues, and therefore they end up becoming non-compliant. So we also do what we call outreach programs, that we go to businesses where they are and educate them the mass and try to make sure that they understand what they're supposed to do and also be able to comply. In addition to that, we also target national activities where we have we have 3 major ones across the country, but we have smaller ones that take place in regions. We take advantage of this because we have many taxpayers that conveniently visit these exhibitions to get information, to assess of certain that we help them to get when we have exhibitions taking place in some of these areas. But we also we've also gone further by having what we call the first initiative where we have what we call the Tax Consultation Bureau in Dar es Salaam, the capital, where we have a place where taxpayers who may not have enough time to ask for more information about their tax affairs can walk in and have enough time to talk to our officers, explain exactly what they want. They take their time and explain to them in detail what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to do it, so that they can be able to comply. This has helped a lot because taxpayers normally that have come there, they've left the place satisfied because the officer that attends them ensures that they get all the information, whether it's from another department. They have to ensure that they get the right information and get them assisted once and for all. The other issue that we're also dealing with, which has been mentioned, is to do with the area of supporting taxpayers, where, for instance, we have a number of online services that have been introduced. For instance, we have on e-filing for taxpayers when they're filing their returns. This is something that we introduced 3 years ago, and also in March we've enhanced some parts of our VAT return submissions through online. We have other activities or services that are also being developed online. So we do help taxpayers by, first of all, having specific classes at the beginning when we're introducing these services to ensure that they understand. We engage first of all the tax consultants, and then those that don't have tax consultants, we engage with them one-on-one, depending on the locations where they are located in the regions and districts, to ensure that they get to understand what procedures they have to go through to be able to comply. So this has also helped us a lot to engage with them. We also have what we call stakeholders forums. These ones we do engage specific groups of taxpayers. For instance, those with doing specific types of businesses. For instance, there could be people in the hospitality industry, the hotels, the restaurants, and so on. We engage them, get to know what are the issues, then we respond to them and also make sure they understand what they're supposed to do depending on their type of businesses. If it is in tourism, we also engage that group and deal with them in their own nature. And then for the rest of the general issues, we also deal with them depending on the methods that we use. But I also agree with the previous speaker where he said there's no single means that's enough to get to all the taxpayers. Taxpayers are different, and at any one time there could be a different requirement or a different way of reaching out to them. And the issue of getting tax education to children at an early stage, there are a couple of things that we're doing there. At the moment, we have what we call tax clubs in secondary schools, where we have, these are voluntarily opened up in various secondary schools, and in so doing, we have a member of staff from the Taxpayer Education Services and Education Department that is like a patron for each secondary school that is responsible for. They sort of take them through various tax education laws and initiatives and so on, so they can understand that. And once in a year, we have tax quiz competitions for the secondary schools, which is televised and we highly publicized so that much as they're educated, this message goes out to the rest of the population in the country. But also, we engage with them in some other activities that sort of attract the attention of their families, the immediate communities that they live in, to be able to understand some elements of tax succession that we educate to them. But also, we're preparing them to be future taxpayers if at all they will be in business, also whether they employ, they understand what the taxes are and why we have to pay taxes, but also make them to understand where the taxes go, which is very important also to share with their families. But in addition to that, we've gone a further step whereby we've also introduced this in the universities. We now have tax associations in the universities that are up and running, and very soon, I think in 2 months' time, we'll have a tax quiz challenge. There will be a televised event for about 4 weeks on some 4 major television stations. But apart from that, we've also been in communication with the Ministry of Education and Ministry of our Ministry of Finance, with our parent ministry, to introduce tax education within the curriculum. Our initial suggestion was to introduce from secondary school, but when we discussed with our colleagues who are responsible for developing curriculum, they suggested that we need to introduce this right from the primary school level, but with the different levels of doses, so that when somebody gets in school, by the time goes throughout the school life, they should have at least got some bits of taxation. They don't get surprised when they get into business, because initially taxation was only taught for to those who do business studies, but for those who do sciences, who didn't have a chance to get to know about taxation. So we are working on that, and it seems to be encouraging. There was one other aspect whereby we've also noted that while educating the public about taxation, indeed, when you enforce more rather than persuading taxpayers to know their obligations and rights, sometimes taxpayers reach a point where they don't really pay voluntarily. We've learned that the hard way, and we've had some initiatives that we use to sort of educate taxpayers using some kind of, can I call it sweet language, and it has made them feel more comfortable with us, and they pay their taxes. When it comes also giving out more information, we use our website, which has a lot of information, including online services, which can help taxpayers do it themselves. And I think just one piece of information that will be of interest for the participants in this forum is that we have 2 languages, official languages. We have English, which is one of the official languages, and we have Swahili, which is our national language. Taking that into account, we have our website is bilingual. We have a website in Kiswahili and in English to take into account all the taxpayers. Imagine we have some taxpayers that probably they're not conversant with English, and we didn't want them to be left out. But we've gone a further step. We've also developed some materials for the disadvantaged communities. For instance, we have Braille material that we've recently come up with the help of the Finnish tax authority, Vero, for the blind, but also have some videos for those video with the subtitles for those who cannot hear, the deaf. So we have a couple of initiatives that we're going on with. We've gone also a further step when it comes to what we have an initiative we call block management system, which is like a territory management system for the for the beverages industry, where they have managed territory. So in our tax authority, we also have a block management system. But in this block management system, we've noted that there had some weaknesses where our officers didn't know much about the taxpayers in their areas and the issues that they have. So my department, with the help of other departments, we've introduced what we call door-to-door taxpayer education to take care of the small taxpayers, small and medium taxpayers, by setting up blocks in certain areas. We go to a region where the teams go out and they make sure that they visit taxpayers in the places where they are. First of all, to check, have they been registered? If they have been registered, have they been assessed? If they have been assessed, have they paid? And if they have not paid, what's the problem? We do it in a very friendly way, and that has increased our sort of partnership with the taxpayers, and has increased their ability to understand what we do, and even trust with the revenue authority. And I think this is a good thing. As of now, let me stop it here and allow other colleagues to continue, or if there are any questions, I'm ready to answer them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. And I think I speak for all of us in saying that was extremely helpful and very interesting. Just to follow up briefly with an additional question there, in terms of your engagement with taxpayers and how you segment them, in terms of your engagements, how you try to reach them, what mechanisms are you using to measure effectiveness? Could you just dig a little bit more into those issues? Thank you.
Indeed, as rightly mentioned in the previous discussions at the beginning, this indeed has been a serious problem, measuring the impact of taxpayer education initiatives. Measuring the impact of taxpayer education initiatives has been a major issue. And in fact, we've always get a lot of questions, not only from my bosses and other interested parties, asking what's the impact of this particular initiative that you've done. To date, what we have in place, at least, is the perception survey. We take perception surveys that have questions that sort of try to address this aspect, to evaluate to which extent taxpayer education initiatives create impact in terms of increasing compliance and voluntary tax payment culture as such, but also the problem is that it's difficult sometimes to relate exactly the increase in the volumes of taxes paid in relation to the initiative in a particular period. But then it's something that we're struggling with, and probably I need to get some information from people in this forum to see what they've done in their areas. So that could be some good practice for us to be able to adapt as well. But at the moment, we rely on perception surveys to gauge what we do and how best we do it.
Great. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate the response there. Just in the interest of time, moving along, we'll move to Jason Piper, Head of Taxation at the ACCA, for the perspective from the accountancy profession. Jason, over to you.
Scott, thank you for that. And I think I'll start by echoing what we've already heard from the other speakers. The question clearly isn't whether we should educate, but how. Given that we're all operating from a starting point of finite resources, we all want to get the maximum return for our efforts. And that really means messages need to come from trusted sources if taxpayers are going to act on them. Now, for the G20, we already have data on who taxpayers trust. As Helen mentioned in her opening address, together with IFAC and CAA&Z, and most recently with support also from colleagues at the OECD, we run a series of surveys asking the general population across the G20 who they trust in relation to the tax system. And I mean, the good news for tax authorities is that across the G20 as a whole, net sentiment towards them is positive, and has improved over the last couple of surveys. However, that high-level picture does mask a lot of important detail. As you might expect, there's a correlation between wealthier countries with higher tax morale and a positive attitude towards tax authorities. But people's views of tax authorities are more polarized than they are for any other stakeholder group. Yes, there are plenty of people who trust and highly trust their tax authority, but there are also large groups who distrust or highly distrust the tax authority. And it's perhaps no surprise that the countries with the highest levels of distrust are also those which we might expect to have lower levels of engagement with the tax authorities and the tax system. So of the 5 countries in the G20 that have a net negative sentiment towards their authority, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico and South Africa are 4 which all have other characteristics such that we'd expect taxpayer education to be more of a priority. And of course this poses a double problem, because it's the taxpayers who least trust the tax authority who are perhaps most likely to be in need of education. But there is some light here, because in every jurisdiction that we surveyed, accountants have significantly positive trust levels, and are the most trusted group of any that we asked about, and ahead of, importantly, groups such as politicians and media and social media. So there's definitely scope for us to work together here. I think we need to see it not so much as a reward, more as a responsibility. and how can we make the most of it as accountants? Well, I think there's a distinction between what we can do as professional bodies and what our individual members can do. Now, our members working on a daily basis in practice are perfectly placed to assist taxpayers and educate them about compliance. These accountants are in regular contact with the systems on a daily basis. They know exactly what to do, whether it's filling in the paper forms, operating the online systems, or more general advice and guidance on how best to engage with tax systems and the formal regulated economy in general. As a professional body, we also have a practical role to play, acting as a conduit for information from tax authorities to our members to help them to do their jobs better, and to ensure that the background to the measures and the rationale for them is understood and can be communicated to the tax-paying public. So I think it's important that we get the messages through from the taxpayers from the people that the taxpayers will trust to them. And then as a professional body, there's also another layer that we can be involved in. I mean, I think we saw very clearly from Anya's slides and also from the examples that Richard's given just how resource intensive teaching and communicating can be. But there is an aspect of this where we can help out as a professional body. We can take part in the research. We can work with bodies such as ICTD. Of course, we have our public trust in tax research. And when we're on a public platform passing comment on government policies or annual budget commentaries and the like, again, we can be sure to reinforce the positive messages about what tax can do as making a contribution to society. So I think in summary, it is very much a case of working together and collaborating to make the most of all the advantages that each group has. And I think also to recognise that, you know, there are going to be groups of taxpayers that maybe we will all struggle to reach. There are unrepresented taxpayers, but at least by working together with the authorities and with the researchers, we can try and pull together some kind of strategy to reach them as best we can.
Great, thank you, Jason. I appreciate that perspective there. And one point from the Trust and Tax Survey that I think bears emphasis and is a piece of good news is that social media did indeed rank lowest in trust level with respect to the tax system. So I think that's a good news story there. Moving right along, we will go through a quick lightning round now as the next step. If I can ask each of the four panelists very quickly in 30 seconds or less or so, what is their key recommendation to policy and decision makers in the tax education space? So we'll go in the same order. So Agnia, Julia, Richard, and Jason, please. So Agnia, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, I think we heard today that there is an important potential to promote taxpayer education, and this is relevant at all levels. Of course, on our side, we continue calling upon different authorities, educational authorities, financial authorities, and financial sector more broadly, to cooperate and to continue spreading the word about tax education and to integrate it into wider financial competency framework. I think today we heard the examples of best practices across the world. I think that the message also is that if the contribution from public authorities for taxpayer education and also for creating partnerships built on trust and accountability is central, I think at the same time the voice of other stakeholders, of other trusted sources, like the community of accountants, can also provide a very significant contribution in this context.
Great, thank you. Over to Julia.
Thank you. My key recommendation or takeaway, I think, would be about collaboration. And I think what I'm taking away from this meeting is that there's so many organizations and actors.
Oh, you went on mute all of a sudden about 5 seconds ago, Julia. So you'll have to. There we go.
Okay, I don't know what happened. As I was saying, it struck me in this meeting and then more broadly discussing these issues that there's many actors and organizations who are interested in contributing to this area of taxpayer education and helping out revenue authorities. So certainly they're not on their own, despite, and that's a good thing. This is a big challenge they have on their hands, especially in low-income countries. So accountants, civil society, academics, and I think it's probably true for most of those collaborations, but particularly when collaborating with academics and researchers, I think it's the most concrete recommendation is to really engage from the very early stages of any initiative. So from the design stage, start discussing, start collaborating, so that one can make the most out of those collaborations, really. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Julia. Richard, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. As I said earlier on, the issue of taxpayer education is now a very crucial issue, and as everybody has spoken, it's now critical to have it as part of their curriculum in any country, because it has become very, very important. And you could see the call coming from all different groups of people, to the extent that for our case here, if we look back 10 years ago or so, people never bothered about what you talk about in taxation. Recently, we have had a lot of people with a lot of interest actually inviting us to talk to their various groups about taxation. Call it non-government organizations, women groups, certain groups of business entrepreneurs, even the clergy. Recently, we had a very big meeting about interdenominational leaders, where we were invited to deliver a message about taxation. After I did my presentation, all the leaders echoed the same message to their congregations, and they promised to do so every now and then. So they use their voices, which are normally heard, and the people that follow them are likely to obey. They can easily probably soften their hearts and do what they're supposed to do when it comes to tax compliance. But we've also recently tried to engage some what we would call tax ambassadors, influential people in the society, say the musicians, some people in certain communities, which I think is a good thing also to adapt in various countries. But also this goes along with the putting up a budget and putting out a part of the policy of the country to be able to be adapted. And one thing I didn't mention was about the impact of social media, which definitely we can't forget about that, because social media has been a very big tool to us, and I think it's a big tool to everybody else. One, it helps you send out the messages quicker than any other means that is available. It helps to clear any misinformation that could be available out there. It helps to deliver repeated messages about what you want taxpayers to do in a particular area. So it spreads out so quickly. And I think from a policy point of view, those are some of the things that should need to be adapted as a mandatory. It should be mandatory somewhere, somehow, in the tax laws. But also, just to let you know, we've noted that our parliament has become very active in terms of advocating for taxpayer education in everything that we do and all circles of the government. And we've been getting a lot of support of that. This should be encouraged across the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And in the interest of time, I think we're going to move to the Q&A from the audience. We've got dozens of questions, a very large amount here. But not to cut Jason off completely here, I'll start with a question for him. This one comes from Chaz Roy Chowdhury. From an education point of view, tax rates need to be justified, and there is a strong correlation between tax rates and the perception of fairness. OECD paper seems to disregard tax rates as part of the discussion. What are your views on keeping tax rates as low as possible and not just tax for tax's sake? Would you agree that, in fact, low tax rates may be a measure of government efficiency? So we'll start with you there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous amount to cover in there, and an awful lot that we could unpack. Probably another half hour in itself. But yeah, I mean, I'd agree that you can take low tax rates as a measure of government efficiency. But equally, one of the things that came through from the public trust work is that for quite a few groups of taxpayers, there's a perception that they're not paying the right amount of tax. And interestingly, for wealthier individuals and multinational companies, I think although the question we ask is, are they paying the right amount? A lot of people say they're paying the wrong amount, and we can draw a pretty strong inference from the white space comments and other external sources that people think they're not paying enough tax, even though bizarrely they may have the highest marginal rates in a progressive system. The perception is that they're not contributing effectively, and that's somewhere that education is incredibly important for people to understand. You know, all these distinctions between the tax burden, the tax rate, the tax base, the impact that different types of taxation can have. I mean, ACCA has done work with a think tank called XTax, looking at what happens if you replace income tax, personal income taxes, with environmental taxes. And it's fascinating stuff to discuss, but until people have got a good base of tax literacy, it's very slow work actually getting that discussion going, even though it could be hugely useful to consider that and get the political will behind it to change it. Because, I mean, taxpayer in many ways is a synonym for voter. You know, the political will is going to be there if taxpayers understand and politicians know they can ask for this stuff. So yeah, I think tax rates are very important, but taxpayers understanding why they're important is perhaps even a bigger element of that, and understanding why sometimes we do maybe need a higher rate somewhere.
Great, thank you, Jason. And we only unfortunately have 5 minutes left for questions. I do want to get to everybody. The next question is for Julia. This one comes from Celeste Bonze. How do you promote voluntary tax compliance in the country with high levels of informality?
Thanks a lot for that question. It's obviously very relevant to many countries, but particularly low-income countries where there's a greater degree of informality. And I think it's a question that is very relevant also to these times, pandemic, post-pandemic, hopefully, that we're living, because we're hearing a lot during this times of lower tax revenue, but extraordinarily high needs of public funds to fund the recovery, that we need to expand the tax net and formalize the informal sector and get more revenue that way. And I think that is a bit problematic because when revenue authorities go out and recruit lots of new taxpayers without accompanying those efforts with taxpayer education and support and facilitation for those small taxpayers, oftentimes, yes, they end up with more registrations, but with no extra revenue. Taxpayers who are not able to engage with the tax system will not pay much revenue. Sometimes they will not even fill any information in their tax declarations. So it's really unhelpful to the end goal of increasing compliance or increasing revenue more specifically. But on the other hand, there is quite a bit that can be done to tax higher income taxpayer and larger firms better. And often these actors in societies end up with lower tax burdens as a result of uneven enforcement oftentimes. So I think for revenue authorities, and in the spirit of improving fairness and promoting voluntary compliance, it's also important to make sure that taxes that are typically levied on the higher income, like property taxes or personal income taxes, are enforced effectively. And in many low-income countries, they are enforced so poorly that they generate a lot less revenue than they could. And we can see that from the data. They are amongst the poorest performing tax types, as opposed to, for example, the CIT or the VAT. So in that sense, taxpayer education, I think, can help in two ways. One, avoiding falling into the trap of formalizing the informal sector, as in registering many taxpayers without telling them what is that they should be doing after they're registered, because that is unhelpful to foster voluntary compliance. So ease the compliance cost on new registrations and think carefully about registration campaigns. but also at the other end of the income distribution, improve the fairness of enforcement, even without increasing tax rates or introducing new taxes, but making sure that all taxes are enforced equally, and accompany those efforts with communication campaigns around equity, which should be then at least helping in the direction of promoting voluntary compliance.
Great, thank you, Julia. So the next question is for Agnia, and this one is, how can we change the mindset of people paying taxes from thinking that it's a burden to some sort of positive contribution or their responsibility?
Yes, thank you for the question. That's a very pertinent question indeed. I think that the study and also the speakers highlighted that, of course, tax deterrence is not the only solution to achieve tax compliance, and even less to achieve trust in tax revenue authorities. Instead, it is important to build partnership which is based on accountancy and transparency. And there is the scope for public authorities to communicate and to explain, to accompany the measures that they do in terms of fiscal choices. That these measures are explained to the broader public. We have all the means now in terms of communication tools. Then the other side of the coin is, of course, to explain well in advance the measures, the tax measures which are being planned, to explain the relevance for each citizen of these measures. And of course, in the longer term, we come back to the taxpayer education status to be started from the earlier age.
Great, thank you, Anya. And one very brief final question. We have very few seconds left, but this one is for Richard. In the era of cryptocurrency and virtual assets, how can countries, especially developing countries, deal with this, recover these assets or approach these sort of technologically based issues?
Well, for the case of our environment, I can't really claim to be very much conversant with what can be done as far as cryptocurrency and so on is concerned, but then I can also speak for an area that we're very familiar with, the area of, we have more than probably 65% of our populations involved in informal business engagements. And that's what I can talk about mostly because I've foreseen even the questions about that area. What we've done, we've tried to develop tax education initiatives and programs that relate to the way they operate. And that is like getting to where they are, using the means that really appeals to them. And we've noted that things like, since there are a lot of mobile phones out there, and whoever is doing business at least has some means of mobile phone. It may not be a smartphone, but at least some kind of a phone where they can receive a text message. So we use a lot of bulk SMS to get to them. We send them information from time to time or reminders, since we have their numbers at the point of registration. So we have that information. But then also, we also try to look at the social media platforms that appeal to them most. For instance, in our environment, we have WhatsApp is one of them. We have a dedicated number for WhatsApp for those who want to WhatsApp us, but also we can WhatsApp them, or when they have information that needs to take a picture, they can do that and send to them, to send to us. But also, we have some platforms like Instagram, which people use a lot for various things. Those who are doing online business, those who are trying to communicate social messages and so on and so forth. So we also get on there and try to communicate. We have people in the background that do manage that and are able to respond instantly or even pick up issues that are feedback for us. So we try to engage them like that. But also we follow them to events that bring together people. And we know that we get a majority of the people in a particular place or in a particular event where we have to get some kind of communication. But what we emphasize is that we ensure that whatever message we communicate to this particular group of people is also publicized widely through various both traditional and social media to ensure that everybody gets the message out there. Otherwise, one big aspect that we are struggling with is to do with the digital economy, which is, but we have some initiatives that we're working together with our colleagues in the rest of Africa through the African Tax Administration Forum, ATAF, And we're trying to pick up also some good examples from the rest of the world of some things, some from OECD and the Commonwealth Association of Tax Administrators, to try to get the right move through which we can tap or get to this particular segment of taxpayers in the online business.
Great, thank you, Richard, and very interesting there. But unfortunately, we're, in the interest of time, we have to move on. But on that, the sort of issue of the African Tax Forum, next we have a video from Alta Prinsloo, the CEO of the Pan-African Federation of Accountants. Unfortunately, due to a last-minute schedule change, she was not able to join us in person, but we have a video of her message, so we'll go ahead and play that now. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, IFAC, ACCA, and OECD for the opportunity to share a few remarks with such a global and inspiring audience. And thank you to the presenters, moderator, and panelists for the rich knowledge shared today. I'm Alta Prinsloo, the CEO of the Pan-African Federation of Accountants. PAFA's membership comprises 56 professional accountancy organizations in 45 countries in Africa. Through our member organizations, we represent thousands of professional accountants, each a potential agent of change. Our mission, therefore, is to strengthen the capacity and influence of Africa's accountancy profession. Today's topic highlights the important link between taxpayer education, public trust, and the SDGs. We spoke a lot about taxpayer education. Allow me to consider the link to public trust and the SDGs. Starting with the SDGs. Nowhere is the need to achieve the SDGs larger than in Africa. Although there is direct alignment between the SDGs and the African Union's Agenda 2063, and 90% of countries in Africa have included the SDGs in their national development plans, the continent is still at a disadvantage. 80% of the world's fragile states are found here. 40% of African countries are classified as low income. The SDG financing gap is significant, while official development assistance and foreign direct investment are declining. And contributions from the private sector are significantly lower than expected. Against this backdrop, it is essential to step up efforts in Africa to mobilize domestic resources. Revenue from taxation is an important component of domestic resources. I therefore commend the OECD on this global sourcebook. This compendium of tax education initiatives from a variety of countries will contribute significantly to strengthening tax culture, compliance, and citizenship globally, and ultimately contribute to revenue from taxation. Nevertheless, moving to trust and tax, we cannot ignore the fact that citizens' perception of public sector transparency, accountability, and governance impacts their willingness to pay taxes. Public trust is a key component of tax culture, compliance, and citizenship. Actions to fight corruption, therefore, are essential. According to the 2021 Corruption Perception Index, 80% of countries in sub-Saharan Africa have made little to no progress in the last 10 years. And on a scale from 0 to 100, where 0 is not good and 100 is very good, the sub-Saharan Africa average is 33, the lowest in the world, and 44 countries rank below 50. Actions to enhance public financial management is also key. Accrual-based financial information prepared in accordance with internationally recognized standards enables informed decisions about scarce public resources and enhances public service delivery, and ultimately enhances citizens' trust in government. And we know such trust is essential to citizens' willingness to pay taxes. PAFA therefore commends IFAC, ACCA, and the OECD for actively contributing to enhance transparency, accountability, and good governance in the public sector. PAFA's IPSAS implementation roadmap for Africa complements your work, and we hope that the African Professionalization Initiative, a partnership between PAFA and the regional bodies representing accountants general and auditors general, would render the public sector accountancy capacity necessary to give effect to your efforts. Let me close with the professional accountant as a champion of change. Professional accountants can help to build trust in tax by advising on tax policy and the functioning of effective tax systems, and contributing to government accountability. They also make effective partners for taxpayer education initiatives. According to the IFAC ACCA CAANZ Public Trust in Tax report, citizens continue to have the highest level of trust in professional accountants. But ethical behavior is crucial. Professional accountancy organizations have a responsibility to ensure that their members who engage in tax services uphold the profession's reputation by complying with the Code of Ethics for Professional Accountants issued by the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants. In 2019, IFAC issued a publication containing good practices for these organizations when they provide guidance to their members on the application of the code when providing tax advice. This is a very valuable resource for professional accountancy organizations in Africa. I am pleased to note that the report encourages further research, debates, and initiatives, particularly in developing countries, to better understand and ultimately strengthen tax morale. I believe that the issue of low tax base and a large informal sector needs further and detailed consideration. As noted in the report, in many developing countries, there are significant development cooperation projects that support domestic resource mobilization. The full potential of taxpayer education will only be realized when it is integrated into this wider ecosystem. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Great. And once again, that was Alta Prinsloo, the CEO of the Pan-African Federation of Accountants. Many thanks to Alta for her words there. And finally, turning things over to Kevin Dancy, CEO of IFAC, for our wrap-up and close. Kevin, over to you.
Thanks, Scott. First, I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their valuable perspectives today. I agree, and I think it's pretty clear that properly functioning tax systems are essential to delivering on the UN's SDGs. There's a strong correlation between poor functioning tax systems and the distance a country needs to travel to achieve the SDGs. So the question then becomes how to most effectively and fairly strengthen the functioning of tax systems. The work of the OECD and others demonstrates that education is a core component of the solution. This in turn raises another question, as Jason and Julia rightly pointed out, how? How to drive our education efforts to have the most impact, considering limited resources on one hand and the importance of what's at stake. Maximizing impact in tax education is an issue too important not to get right. Looking across the conversation today, as well as the OECD report, two themes really jump out. The importance of embedding the purpose of taxation into school system curricula, including what taxes pay for and why individuals have a civic duty to pay their taxes, linked to the tax morale issue. And secondly, trying to make taxes as understandable as possible. Tax systems are complicated and incomprehensible to the layperson. There's a communications challenge here. And it's a particular challenge because who actually pays the taxes is often different than the actual person who bears the burden of the tax. Only real people bear tax, and that really complicates the communication challenge. I now want to just turn to the role of the profession in education. I think this event has done two things. First, it has given a hint of the diversity of stakeholders that need to come together on this issue. And second, how central the accountancy profession is amongst those stakeholders. And there's a number of important intersections there. First, there's the importance of professional accountancy organizations and the role of the PIO in driving ethics and tax practice. I was happy to hear Alta's support for the IFAC tax guidance in this space. Both the POs in Africa and elsewhere find it useful. That said, we're very much interested in continuing the conversation on ethics and tax practice, so happy to get any feedback from any other stakeholder or participant on this call in terms of what we could do going forward. Secondly, in terms of the accountancy profession, there's the role of the individual accountant in upholding the core principles of the International Code of Ethics. And third, organizationally, and here I'm speaking on behalf of IFAC, but I think the same goes for many of our POs, that there's more that we can do, not just in tax education, but in financial literacy more broadly. Tax education is just a subset of financial literacy. Last year, IFAC worked with IOSCO in the World Investor Week in terms of the financial literacy issue, and we intend to do that again this year. And I think as I listen to the remarks, Helen's opening remarks, what the OECD has done, what the EU is doing, I think there's various things that we need to think about in terms of IFAC and the professional accounts organizations as to whether we could do more in this space. Just want to touch briefly on the broader context. I'll try and be very brief here because I think we're running over in terms of time. But, you know, I think tax education alone, and this ran through the chat issue, is not going to solve this on their own. I think with the changes in technology, there could be things that actually could impact, and in a positive way, the ability of tax administrators to collect taxes. I just want to give one example in terms of the Pakistani economy, where COVID effectively pushed a major portion of the economy online. In a matter of months, the entire structure of the economy changed. As a result, the tax authorities found themselves in collecting a far larger portion of sales tax than anticipated, an enviable situation for the tax authority to be in. That said, it is unclear how that will unfold as COVID restrictions ease and people return or not to previous modes of commerce. But again, the world going to a digital platform, you know, phone systems, we could talk about what's happened with the MPs and mobile phone system in Kenya, etc. I think technology is changing the way folks interact, and therefore will have an impact in terms of looking at the tax compliance issue. Again, it won't solve it on its own. I think we need tax education. The tax morale issue is important, but also how we use technology to enhance tax compliance will be an important aspect of this as well. With that, I think I'd like to wind it up. I would like to thank all of our speakers today, Minister Negresco, Grace, Helen, Agnia, Julia, Richard, Jason, Scott, Alta, etc. I'd like to thank all of the participants for joining us today. And with that, I will close this event, and everybody enjoy the rest of their days wherever they are around the world. Thank you very much.